The morning sun spilled over Charleston's cobblestone streets, painting the city in soft gold. Inside Riverstone Bank, an old building of marble and glass that smelled faintly of cedar polish. The rhythm was predictable, clicking keyboards, polite laughter, the sound of wealth moving quietly. That rhythm stopped the moment he walked in. Elias Carter looked like any other professional, clean-shaven, tailored Navy suit calm stride. But something about him drew attention. Maybe the quiet authority in his eyes, or the way people instinctively moved aside as he passed. To the staff, he was just another customer. To one man in particular, he was a problem. "Sir, can I help you?" The voice came from behind a counter. Richard Hale, the branch manager, wore his authority, like armor, sharp tie, forced smile, and an unshakable belief that he knew exactly who belonged in his bank. He didn't recognize the name Elias Carter. He didn't need to. His judgment had already been made, and that judgment, as you'll soon see, would cost him everything. Before we go on, let me ask you, have you ever seen someone underestimate the wrong person? Stay with me, because this story proves that appearances can deceive more powerfully than you think. By the end, you'll see why this moment changed not just one man's career, but an entire institution. Elias approached the counter. "Good morning. I'd like to make a withdrawal." His tone was steady, respectful. The young clerk behind the desk, nervous but polite, began typing on her computer. Before she could finish, Richard's voice cut through the air like a whip. "I'll handle this," he said. The clerk froze. Richard stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor. He scanned Elias from head to toe, his eyes lingering just long enough to make his meaning clear. "I'll need to see identification," he said. Elias handed over his ID without a word. Richard examined it longer than necessary, tapping his pen against the counter, his suspicion barely hidden. "And what exactly is the purpose of your visit, I told you?" Elias replied calmly. "A withdrawal." "From my account?" Richard narrowed his eyes. "This says you have an executive account. Those are special clients. We'll need additional verification." The room grew quieter. The receptionist paused her typing. A security guard at the far end of the lobby looked up. The air felt heavier, like the moment before a thunderstorm. "Is that bank policy?" Elias asked. His voice was calm, but there was weight beneath it. "It's my policy," Richard snapped. "We've had incidents." Across the room, a woman, Mrs. Whitaker, a silver-haired regular, whispered to a friend, "He's at it again." The friend nodded silently. Elias smiled faintly. "Your policy," he repeated, slipping his phone from his pocket. He pressed one button and held it to his ear. "This is Carter," he said quietly. "Send over the documents. Riverstone branch?" Then he hung up. Richard frowned. "Carter, what documents? Who are you calling?" "You'll see," Elias replied. His eyes were steady, unbothered. "Let's just wait a moment." A few customers began pretending to check their phones, pretending not to watch. The tension was magnetic. Every second felt like a held breath. Richard folded his arms. "You can't expect special treatment here," he said loudly, as if to reassure himself. "I don't want special treatment," Elias said. "Just the same treatment you give everyone else." You people always think Richard stopped mid-sentence, realizing too late what he'd said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Elias tilted his head. "You people." The silence was absolute. Somewhere a printer hummed and stopped. The young clerk, eyes wide, looked down at her keyboard, wishing she could disappear. Richard cleared his throat, his face reddening. I mean, customers who don't follow proper procedures. Of course, Elias said softly. His calmness was unnerving. I'll wait. Minutes stretched painfully long. The marble floor reflected the harsh afternoon light. Richard tried to busy himself with paperwork, his hands trembling slightly. Then the glass doors hissed open. A tall man in a gray suit walked in his presence, commanding immediate attention. He didn't look around. He walked straight to Elias. Mr. Carter, the newcomer said, his tone respectful. I came as quickly as I could. Richard blinked. Mr. Carter. The man in gray turned to him. Yes, Mr. Hale. Elias Carter, chairman of the Carter Group Holdings, principal owner of Riverstone Bank. The clipboard slipped from Richard's hands and clattered to the floor. His mouth opened, but no words came. The entire lobby froze. Customers stopped pretending. Employees stopped breathing. Mrs. Whitaker smiled faintly, whispering, Well, I'll be damned. Elias turned to Richard, his voice quiet but sharp. You said this bank had certain policies. I suggest you start reviewing them. Richard's face drained of color. His confidence, his power evaporated before everyone's eyes. Elias leaned slightly forward, just enough for only Richard to hear. You judged me in the one place I built to end judgment. Think about that. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside the streets of Charleston bustled on unaware that inside Riverstone Bank something had shifted forever. If you were standing there that day, whose side would you have been, on the man with the power or the man with the patience? Leave your thoughts below. Because what happened next was even more shocking. Richard Hale's face was still pale when the man in the gray suit, Mr. Donovan, turned to him. Mr. Hale, Donovan said evenly, Please gather your staff. Mr. Carter would like a few words. The sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. Around the room, employees glanced at each other, unsure whether to move or breathe. Richard nodded stiffly, his lips trembling as he fumbled for words he couldn't find. Elias Carter stood silent, composed. The same calm expression that had unnerved Richard minutes earlier now seemed almost regal. He wasn't angry. That was what made the room so tense, his restraint. The quiet power of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. While the staff assembled, Elias looked around the lobby, the marble floors, the grand chandelier, the walls lined with framed photos of Riverstone Bank's legacy. He had approved every inch of this place. Yet standing there now, he felt something break inside him. It wasn't pride, it was disappointment. He had built this institution to be different, a place where respect didn't depend on what you looked like or how you sounded. But clearly, not everyone understood that vision. He turned his gaze toward Richard, who was standing behind the counter, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. Mr. Hale, Elias said quietly, Tell me, what do you see when you look at me? Richard stammered. Sir, I didn't mean. Elias raised a hand. That's not what I asked. The room was silent. A nervous cough echoed from the back. The young clerk, Maya Rodriguez, shifted her weight eyes darting between the two men. She wanted to say something to step in, but fear glued her to the spot. Richard swallowed hard. I saw a customer, he muttered. No, Elias said softly. You saw what you thought a customer should look like. That's the difference. Before Richard could respond, The sound of an email notification chimed from one of the computers. Maya glanced at the screen, her eyes widening. She whispered to the colleague beside her, "It's from the Carter Group Holdings. Top priority." Elias caught her gaze. "Would you read it aloud, please?" Her voice trembled as she obeyed. "Attention, all Riverstone branches. Effective immediately, please extend full support to Mr. Elias Carter, our chairman, who will be conducting on-site evaluations." The air seemed to crackle. Whispers spread through the room. Customers murmured, phones discreetly lifted to record. Richard's shoulders slumped. He suddenly looked smaller, diminished. Elias didn't gloat. Instead, he looked directly at Maya. "What did you think when this happened?" She hesitated. "Sir, I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't know what to do. He's my manager." Elias nodded. "That's fair. Silence can be a survival instinct, but silence can also let the wrong things grow." His eyes moved across the room, and when people stay quiet long enough, the wrong things become normal. Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly customer who had witnessed everything, spoke up. "He's right," she said firmly. "This isn't the first time he's done it. I've seen how some folks are treated here. Just never thought someone would finally say something." Richard's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Whitaker, please, enough." Elias said, his voice still calm, but now it carried a weight that made even the air feel heavier. "You had a choice today, Mr. Hale. You could have chosen respect. Instead, you chose assumption. Do you know why that matters?" Richard's eyes flickered, unsure whether to answer. "Because assumption," Elias continued, "is the first step toward injustice. It starts small. Who you serve first, who you doubt, who you interrupt. Then one day, it becomes policy. And then it becomes culture." The lobby fell quiet again. The hum of the city outside seemed distant, like the world had shrunk to this one moment. Richard took a shaky breath. I was following procedure." Elias's tone didn't rise, but it sharpened. "No, you were following prejudice and hiding behind procedure." Mr. Donovan stepped closer, speaking softly. "Sir, would you like to move this discussion to the conference room?" Elias shook his head. "No, everyone should hear this. That's the problem, we hide too much behind closed doors." He turned to the staff, his voice reaching every corner of the lobby. Riverstone Bank was built on trust, on fairness. Yet what I witnessed today was neither. I founded this company because I once stood in a line just like this as a young man, denied service at a bank because someone thought I didn't belong there. I told myself that day, if I ever build something of my own, no one will feel that small again. A murmur spread through the crowd, sympathy, guilt, admiration, all mixing in the air. Richard looked like a man sinking under the weight of his own decisions. "I didn't know who you were," he said weakly. "That's the point," Elias replied. "You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me with respect." A notification pinged again, this time from a customer's phone. A short video clip recorded minutes earlier had just been uploaded to social media. In less than 5 minutes, it was already gaining traction. Someone whispered, "It's going viral." Elias sighed, rubbing his temple. "I didn't come here for a spectacle. I came to see whether the values we put in writing were being lived out in reality. Now I have my answer." He paused, letting the words settle before continuing. "This isn't about embarrassment, Mr. Hale. It's about accountability. Because when people in power forget their humanity, Institutions lose their soul. Maya swallowed hard, then spoke, her voice shaky but brave. Mr. Carter, I think we can do better. I want to do better. Elias gave a faint smile. That's how change begins, with one person willing to say that out loud. He turned to Donovan. Suspend Mr. Hale pending review. We'll address this at the board level. But today, this moment stays in the open. Richard didn't protest. He simply nodded, defeated, as if every ounce of arrogance had drained away. Elias took a slow breath, scanning the faces before him, employees, customers, bystanders, who would leave with a story they'd never forget. No one's above learning, he said finally, and no one's beneath respect. Then he walked toward the door, his reflection following him in the glass. Outside, the autumn light poured through the windows, and for the first time, the silence in Riverstone Bank didn't feel tense. It felt like the beginning of a reckoning. The following morning, Riverstone Bank was no longer just a bank. It was a stage. The marble floors that once gleamed with quiet prestige now carried the echoes of whispers and the weight of guilt. Every employee who had been there the day before had received an urgent memo. Mandatory staff assembly at 9:00 a.m. Attendance required. They all knew what it was about. When Elias Carter entered, the room fell silent. He didn't walk like a man who sought revenge. He walked like a man who carried responsibility. His calm presence demanded attention more than anger ever could. Behind him stood Mr. Donovan, expression composed, a folder clutched in his hands. Richard Hale sat in the front row, his eyes fixed on the polished floor, his once sharp posture now bent under the invisible weight of shame. Elias stopped in the center of the lobby, his reflection glimmering faintly in the glass wall behind him. Yesterday, he began, his voice low, but steady. Something happened in this very room, something that cannot be ignored. He let the silence stretch, not to intimidate, but to make people feel the pause. The air was heavy with the memory of what they had all witnessed. I built Riverstone. He continued on 3 principles: trust, fairness, and dignity. Not for some people. Not for the ones who looked the part. For everyone. Yet somehow, those values were forgotten. He turned toward Richard, not in hostility, but in quiet disappointment. Mr. Hale, you represent this branch. When someone walks through those doors, you are the face of this institution. Yesterday, that face told a customer me that he didn't belong. Richard's mouth twitched, as if searching for words that no longer existed. Sir, Elias raised a hand gently. No excuses? This isn't about me. It's about what your reaction says about who we are. He faced the staff. You all saw what happened, and not one of you stepped in. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of habit. But that silence spoke volumes. When wrong becomes comfortable, that's when institutions lose their humanity. Maya shifted uneasily near the back. The words struck her deeply. She remembered her own silence, how she'd felt the injustice, but had chosen safety instead. Elias noticed her expression and nodded slightly, as if to say, it's not too late to do better. He gestured toward Donovan. Mr. Donovan, please read the statement. Donovan opened the folder and began. Effective immediately, an internal review will be conducted on all Riverstone branches. We will evaluate staff conduct, client treatment, and adherence to inclusion policies. Additionally, bias and sensitivity training will become mandatory company-wide. Murmurs rippled through the room. A few employees looked defensive. Others seemed relieved that someone was finally saying out loud what needed to be said. Elias spoke again. This is not punishment. This is correction. But let me be clear. Accountability begins at the top. And today that starts here. He turned back to Richard. Mr. Hale, you've worked here 15 years. Tell me, what have you learned about leadership? Richard hesitated. That leadership means setting standards, protecting the bank's integrity. Elias stepped closer. And who defines integrity? The policies, the numbers, or the way we treat people when no one is watching? Richard swallowed hard. I made a mistake. Elias's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. A mistake is forgetting someone's name. What you did was make a choice. You chose suspicion over service control, over compassion. And now you must face the consequences of that choice. The entire staff was silent. No one moved. Even the faint hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade away. Elias's voice grew quieter, more intimate. Do you know what people like me carry? Every small humiliation, every time someone assumes we don't belong, it stays with us. You may forget a moment like yesterday, but for the person on the receiving end, it lingers. It changes how we see the world. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I built this bank because I was once told I didn't deserve a seat at the table. And I promised myself, if I ever built my own table, there would be room for everyone. Yesterday, you made me question whether that promise is still alive here. Richard's eyes glistened, shame breaking through the shell of pride. I'm sorry, he whispered. Truly, I didn't realize how deep the harm went. Elias nodded slowly. Apologies matter, but change matters more. You can't undo yesterday, but you can decide who you'll be tomorrow. He turned to address everyone again. Riverstone cannot just exist to hold money, it must hold values. When someone walks through these doors, they should feel seen, not sized up. If we fail at that, we fail at everything. Maya stepped forward, her voice small but steady. Mr. Carter, if I may, I think we can start something new. Not just training, but open conversations. Safe spaces where people can talk about what they don't understand. Elias smiled faintly. That's how change begins, by facing discomfort instead of hiding from it. He glanced at Donovan. Make that part of the initiative. Real stories. Real dialogue. Donovan nodded, scribbling notes. Elias looked around the room once more. The employees, people who had once avoided his gaze, now met his eyes, some with tears, some with guilt, but all with recognition. This moment, Elias said softly, isn't about one man's mistake. It's about all of us choosing who we want to be from this day forward. He turned back to Richard for the last time. You're suspended pending review. What happens after that depends on what you do next. Not with your mouth, but with your actions. Richard nodded faintly. I understand. As Elias stepped back, the staff began to applaud, not out of obligation, but out of respect. The sound was hesitant at first, then stronger until it filled the lobby with something that felt like release. Elias didn't smile. He simply stood still, absorbing the moment, knowing that true change doesn't come from speeches, it comes from reckoning. And on that morning, Riverstone Bank finally faced its own. By the next morning, Riverstone Bank was on every news feed in America. The headline flashed across television screens and social media timelines, CEO denied service at his own bank. The story spread faster than anyone could contain it. Video clips from customers inside the branch had gone viral overnight. Millions of views, thousands of comments, debates raging in real time. Some praised Elias Carter for his composure, calling him a symbol of dignity. Others questioned why he didn't react with anger. But Elias didn't care about how people spun it. He cared about what it revealed. In his office on the top floor of the Riverstone headquarters, the city skyline stretched behind him like a painted backdrop. Elias sat by the window, not in triumph, but in quiet reflection. He had spent his entire life building this institution on trust and fairness, and yet a single day had exposed how far they still had to go. He wasn't angry at Richard Hale anymore. He was angry at the culture that allowed people like Richard to think their assumptions were normal. Mr. Donovan entered the room, a folder in hand. "The media's not letting go," he said carefully. "We've had requests for interviews from every major network." Elias didn't turn from the window. "Schedule one," he said. "Just one. I'll say what needs to be said." That evening, Elias appeared on a nationally televised talk show. The host introduced him as the man whose own bank failed its founder. The audience laughed awkwardly, unsure how to react. Elias waited for the noise to fade before speaking. His tone was calm, deliberate. "What happened to me," he said, "wasn't about one man being disrespectful. It was about what happens when good people stop noticing small injustices. It starts with looks, words, and policies that go unchallenged. Then one day, it becomes a headline. And I don't want anyone else to have to learn this lesson the way I did." He didn't blame Richard. He didn't shame anyone. Instead, he announced a company-wide initiative called the Empathy First Program, a series of workshops, bias awareness training, and open forums that would be implemented across all Riverstone branches. His words struck a chord nationwide. The interview went viral within hours, not because of outrage, but because of hope. A few weeks later, the Charleston branch reopened under new supervision. Maya Rodriguez had been promoted to assistant branch manager. The decision surprised her, but Elias had made it clear, "You saw what was wrong. Next time I need you to speak up. Leadership isn't about power. It's about courage." She took those words to heart. Meanwhile, Richard Hale was nowhere to be seen. He had taken his suspension, quietly avoiding the spotlight. But what no one knew was that Elias had offered him a choice to resign quietly, or to stay on one condition: he would attend every Empathy First session volunteer in the community and work without pay for 3 months at one of Riverstone's outreach programs for underserved families. And Richard agreed. The first day he arrived at the community center, he felt out of place. The walls were covered in murals painted by children. A young woman at the front desk handed him a folder labeled Financial Literacy 101. His assignment was simple: teach budgeting and savings to teenagers from low-income neighborhoods. He was nervous. He wasn't sure how to speak to them without sounding condescending. But then a boy, about 16, raised his hand and asked, "Why should I trust a bank? My mom said they just take your money." Richard froze. He didn't have a corporate answer for that. For the first time, he listened instead of talking. "Maybe you're right to feel that way," he said quietly. "But maybe people like me can start earning back that trust." The room went silent. It was a small moment, but for Richard, It was the beginning of something different. Elias visited the center a month later. When he saw Richard surrounded by kids helping them fill out mock bank forms, he smiled faintly. After the session, Richard approached him, looking humbled but sincere. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I can't undo what happened, but I can change how I show up from now on." Elias nodded. "Then make sure this isn't the end of your lesson. It's the start of someone else's." Back at headquarters, Riverstone was transforming. Posters reading "Empathy First" decorated hallways. Branches across the country began hosting community trust days, where staff volunteered to serve outside the bank walls. Maya spearheaded a mentorship program for young professionals of color entering the finance industry. Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly customer from that day, became a local advocate for fairness in business practices, writing op-eds about her experience, witnessing the day the bank found its conscience. Public opinion began to shift. Riverstone wasn't just a bank anymore, it was becoming a movement. During a board meeting one afternoon, Donovan handed Elias a report. "Customer satisfaction is up 27%, he said. "But more importantly, we've received hundreds of messages from people saying your story gave them hope." Elias looked at the report and smiled softly. Then it was worth it. He knew the wound from that day would never fully disappear, but perhaps it didn't need to. Scars remind us where growth began. The story that once embarrassed Riverstone had become its turning point. And as the sun set behind the skyline, Elias Carter realized something profound. Change didn't come from public outrage or viral videos. It came from the quiet moments that followed when people decided to be better than they were yesterday. That was the real aftershock, the kind that shakes not buildings, but hearts. 1 year later, Riverstone Bank was almost unrecognizable. The same marble floors that had once reflected silence and tension now carried laughter, conversation, and purpose. Posters with the words "Empathy First" and "Integrity" in every interaction lined the halls not as slogans, but as reminders of what had been rebuilt. Elias Carter walked through the Charleston branch slowly, his footsteps echoing softly. He paused by the main counter, the very place where everything had unfolded. The space looked brighter now. There were more diverse faces behind the desks, more genuine smiles greeting customers as they walked in. He noticed Maya Rodriguez speaking to a young couple, guiding them through a mortgage application. She caught his eye and smiled, a mixture of pride and gratitude in her expression. After the couple left, Maya joined him. "We hit our 1-year mark today," she said. "Applications from minority-owned businesses have doubled. Customer complaints about bias down almost 90%. Elias nodded. "Numbers are good," he said quietly. "But what about trust?" She hesitated, then smiled. "We're earning it back, one person at a time." That was all he needed to hear. Across the country, Riverstone's transformation had become a case study in corporate ethics. Universities invited Elias to speak about leadership, not the kind measured by profit margins, but by moral courage. His speech at Georgetown Business School drew a standing ovation. When he said true power isn't about control, it's about accountability. Fairness isn't a department policy, it's a daily choice. The story that had once been a scandal had turned into a legacy. The day the bank found its conscience, as one journalist called it, was now required reading in ethics programs. Business leaders discussed the Riverstone model for inclusive reform. But for Elias, none of it was about recognition. He cared only that the lesson stuck. Richard Hale, the man at the center of it all, had changed more than anyone. After completing his community work and returning to Riverstone in a new role, he became a trainer for the Empathy First initiative. In one of his first sessions, he faced a room full of skeptical employees and said, "I used to think fairness was about following rules. Turns out it's about seeing people." There was no defensiveness in his tone, only sincerity. Over time, people stopped seeing him as the villain of the story and began to see him as proof that people can learn if they're willing to face the mirror. Maya's leadership grew too. Under her guidance, Riverstone launched the Open Door Project, a mentorship and grant program that helped underrepresented entrepreneurs access funding. The program spread to 8 states within months. She often said that Elias's words had changed how she saw her job. "He taught me that leadership isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about asking the right questions." Even Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly customer who had once watched the incident unfold, became something of a local hero. She was featured in a documentary about Riverstone's turnaround. Her words, simple but piercing respect, isn't complicated. You just give it because everyone deserves it. Elias watched these changes quietly, never taking credit. His satisfaction came not from the applause of the public, but from the small moments that proved progress. A clerk greeting a customer without judgment. A branch manager pausing before making assumptions. A culture that finally understood what fairness meant in action. He poured those lessons into a book, The Price of Assumption, part memoir, part manifesto. It wasn't a bestseller, but it resonated deeply with readers who had lived through similar experiences, those who had been underestimated, and those who had done the underestimating. The final line of the book read, "Justice isn't built in courtrooms or boardrooms. It's built in the spaces between people, in the choices we make when no one's watching." One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Charleston skyline, Elias returned once more to the branch where it had all begun. The light from the street lamps glowed through the tall glass windows, reflecting his face alongside the Riverstone logo. A young boy stood near the door, clutching a piggy bank, waiting for his mother. The boy looked up at him and asked, "Sir, do you work here?" Elias smiled, warmth in his voice. "No, son," he said softly, "but I helped build it." The boy nodded and ran to his mother, leaving Elias alone with his thoughts. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let the hum of the city fill the silence. He thought about his father, about the day decades ago when a bank had turned them away. He thought about how far they had come and how far the world still had to go. He turned toward the door, taking one last look at the place that had once been a symbol of humiliation and now stood as a monument to change. Above the entrance, engraved in simple silver letters, was Riverstone's new motto, "Respect is the real currency." As he stepped into the night, the cool Charleston breeze brushed against his face. The city moved as it always had, unaware of the quiet revolution that had taken root within its walls. Elias Carter walked down the sidewalk, no longer burdened by what had happened, but strengthened by what it had created. Legacy, he realized, isn't about what you leave behind. It's about what you set in motion. And somewhere inside Riverstone Bank, that motion was still alive, pulsing with every transaction, every handshake, every choice to see another human being with fairness. That was the true wealth he had built, and it was worth more than all the money in the vaults combined. When the story of Elias Carter first began, it was simply about a man walking into a bank, a place he had built with his own vision, his own sweat, and his own belief in fairness. But what unfolded that day inside Riverstone Bank became something far greater than one man's experience. It became a mirror reflecting how bias, pride, and silence can quietly shape the world around us, and how one person's grace under pressure can turn humiliation into hope. Elias's story wasn't about revenge or exposure. It was about revelation. In that brief encounter, when Richard Hale chose judgment over respect, the world saw something painfully familiar. People recognized the looks, the tone, the quiet dismissal that so many have felt in their own lives. But they also saw something rare, Elias's refusal to meet anger with anger. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. Instead, he chose patience, dignity, and truth. In a moment that could have divided, he created a bridge. That's the kind of strength that doesn't trend for a day, it lasts a lifetime. Over time, Elias's composure reshaped an entire institution. Riverstone Bank went from a symbol of quiet discrimination to a living example of what accountability and humility can build. The people who once stood in silence like Maya Rodriguez found their voice. The one who once embodied arrogance, Richard Hale, found redemption. And through it all, Elias stood as a reminder that leadership isn't about commanding obedience, it's about inspiring growth. His journey teaches us that change doesn't come through outrage alone. It comes through awareness, education, and empathy. It comes from recognizing our own blind spots and daring to challenge them. The greatest transformation doesn't happen in others, it happens within ourselves. Elias didn't just change a bank. He changed the way people thought about fairness, professionalism, and humanity. Think about what that means for us today. We live in a world that moves fast, too fast sometimes to stop and see the person standing in front of us. We make judgments without knowing stories. We defend policies instead of principles. But the lesson from Riverstone is simple: slow down. Listen. See people, not categories. Treat everyone, every single person, as someone who matters, because they do. When faced with injustice, don't respond with fury alone. Channel it into purpose. When given authority, don't use it to control, use it to uplift. When you see someone being dismissed or disrespected, speak up. Courage doesn't always come with volume. Sometimes it comes with quiet consistency. Elias Carter's legacy is not a story locked in the past. It's a challenge to each of us in the present. Whether you run a company, manage a team, or simply interact with people every day, you carry the same power. He did the power to choose respect over judgment, the power to lead by example, the power to turn uncomfortable moments into meaningful change. What happened in that bank could happen anywhere, in a store, in an office, even in our own homes. But the outcome doesn't have to be the same. Every time you choose empathy over ego, fairness over fear, and kindness over control, you create a small ripple of change. And enough ripples can move oceans. So remember, this fairness is not weakness, it's wisdom. Compassion is not softness, it's strength. And respect is not something to be earned only by status, it's something we owe each other simply for being human. That's the true moral of Elias Carter's story. If this story touched you, if it made you pause and think, then help us keep this message alive. Subscribe to the channel, share this video, and be part of a community that believes stories can change hearts. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating powerful, meaningful content that challenges perspectives and reminds us what really matters. Because at the end of the day, storytelling is not just about entertainment, it's about enlightenment. And together, we can keep shining light on the truths that bring us closer to each other. So hit that subscribe button and let's keep building a world story by story where fairness is more than an idea. It's a way of life.